All right, folks. I want to apologize for the grainy picture uh, this morning. Webcam isn't exactly the greatest thing I mean the greatest thing I could have got a better webcam, but I didn't. We are following up with the last part of the Book of Ruth. It's sermon number 2. I'm going to cover a couple key facts. So, here we go. Um, from uh, the story of Ruth, this is sermon 1. What we covered in sermon 1 is number 1, a non Jewish woman is the ancestor of Israel's greatest dynasty of kings, from David to the King of Kings, Jesus. 2, the writer of the book is one of the most beautifully written books in the Bible, in my opinion, never mentions who he is. The book is traditionally ascribed to the prophet Samuel, but we are not 100% sure he is the author. It is believed that Ruth lived about 1100 BC. This is number 3. She was David's greatest great grandmother. David ruled in about 1000 BC. 4. Theologians are left to guess that the book was started around 950 BC when Solomon ruled. 5. Other believe, Others believe that the book was written during the time of Israel's exile in the, into Babylon, which is modern day Iraq, and about in the 500 BCs, in the 500s BC. All right, now we're going to go ahead and go to uh, our sermon for today. We left off actually how charity was the law back in the day of Ruth. The last quote was given of, I quote, give generously to the poor, not grudgingly, for the Lord your God will bless you in everything you do. Deuteronomy 15, verse 10. And this is the last lines of it, last week's sermon, so we can lead into this sermon. It is amazing that Ruth had the dedication to Naomi to follow her home to Bethlehem to live among a people that were not her people, and to follow a God that was not her God. Then she goes a step further and finds a field where she can follow the women workers as we described above. What amazing quality in a woman that had no ties to this old widow. Now, for today's sermon, ta- uh, how Ruth gets her man. We finally get to the point where things get interesting and we get towards the end of the book. I quote, "Take a bath, put on perfume, dress in your nicest clothes, then go to the threshing floor. But don't let Boaz see you until he has finished eating and drinking. Be sure to notice where he lies down. Then go uncover his feet and lie down there. He will tell you what to do." Ruth chapter 3, verses 3 through 4. When we find at this point of the book, Ruth, that Boaz is a relative of Naomi's late husband and sons, and by Jewish law is eligible to fulfill the requiring law that a relative of a dead man must marry the widow of the family member to carry the dead man's family name. Now, what this basically means is back in the day, um, if there was no son to marry, let's say Ruth's husband died, and and there was a brother. Ruth's husband had a brother that was not married. It would be his responsibility to marry Ruth to carry on his brother's namesake, or an uncle to carry on his nephew's name. So this is what the Jewish law basically meant. Naomi decides that Boaz is husband potential for Ruth. We can refer to the law above, but Boaz has already showed interest in Ruth. We see this in last week's sermon. By allowing her to follow the women harvesters and telling the women harvesters to leave extra for Ruth so she can end up having food to end up taking home, and allowing her to sit at the lunch tables when the afternoon meal is made. What comes next can seem like an entrapment in today's terms when Naomi sets a plan in motion with Ruth. It looks like Naomi is helping a young widow trap an older rich man into marrying her. Now, during harvest, Boaz and his workers slept outside near the pile of cut grain stalks. Why, you may ask, at this during this time, which we don't do today, because farmers would bring their harvest inside, is to protect their crop from thieves. See, back in the day, farmers were only allowed to make one pass through their fields, and they were supposed to leave the rest of their crop for the poor. Like I've said, women would go behind the main farmers to harvest what was left, and then there would be what they called aliens, which the word aliens meant people from a different land would go and see what they would be able to harvest after that. Sunset comes, we think, about 7:30 p.m. this time of year in early May. This is when the workers have settled down, they've already eaten and already sleeping for the next day's hard work. They rise at sunset, the sunrise, and get ready to go to the fields. Ruth has already bathed and perfumed herself, or scented herself in this period of time in what is called a scent of romance, and waits for Boaz to fall asleep. As mentioned above, the other workers are asleep by now. This is when Ruth sneaks into the grain house, glides over to Boaz, slips under the covers of his feet. This is a much different courting ritual than it is today. This is what I like about this story, this book, and I have to stress this: there is no sex, but redemption in this book. No sex ever mentioned in this book. All through the Bible, well, mostly all through the Bible, you never hear of sex. And especially in this situation, you don't hear of sex. You'll see what I mean as I go along with this closing of Ruth. Around midnight, Boaz wakes up pleasantly surprised. What pleases him is Ruth's reply when he asks who she is. I quote, "I am your servant Ruth. Spread the corner of your covering over me, for you are my family redeemer." Ruth chapter 3 verse 9. Now this is a sly take in the meaning uh, on something that Boaz has said earlier in their meeting. I quote, and this is what Boaz had said: "May the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge, reward you fully for what you have done." Ruth chapter 2 verse 12. A quick explanation of the word here. The Hebrew word, or one of the Hebrew words that we could use, of wing and cover are the same. Most likely the word that was used, could have been used, is what they call kanaf. Kanaph. Boaz has said that he hoped that God would protect Ruth under his wing, but now Ruth is asking Boaz to become God's protective wing by spreading his cover over her. And all of this in the eyes of Boaz. Ruth could have the pick of any man that she wanted. Added added to this, Boaz felt his age was a factor. Though whatever conversation, Ruth still opts for a man like Boaz, to honor Naomi's family tradition. This draws Boaz to her more and more. He feels that she's more respectable because she shows wisdom. There is a catch in all of this, though, and Boaz describes an older man, a man that is closer to the family than he is. There's one step up to the family than he is. And by this Jewish tradition and laws, would make him eligible first. This means he would have the right to marry Ruth first, and Boaz promises to talk to this man in the morning and try to see what would happen. Boaz lets Ruth spend the night. It is suspected that Boaz has Ruth sneak off before daylight to possibly save both of their reputations. Is this happily ever after? Let's see. I quote, Boaz took Ruth into his house, and she became his wife. When he slept with her, the Lord enabled her to become pregnant, and she gave birth to a son, and they named him Obed, Obed. He became the father of Jesse and the grandfather of David. Ruth chapter 4, verses 13 and 17. Naomi still had land in Bethlehem as promised. The following morning, Boaz went to the city gates, and in front of 10 witnesses, Boaz makes an offering to the man, first in line to marry Ruth. He does it in a way with the Savi warrior leading a surprise attack. He says he needs to find a man to takes, take her husband's property. Now, some translations say she is selling it, but the word can also mean giving away. Jewish widows in Ruth's state don't seem to have legal rights to inherit and sell their husband's property. The land passes on to a son, daughter, not a widow, brother, uncle, or nearest male relative in that order. Numbers chapter 27, verses 8 through 11. Widows weren't on that list. Boaz comes with a surprise. He says, if you want the land, it's yours. But if not, I am next in line. All right, I'll take it, the man says. But here comes the surprise. Of course he purchased, of course he purchased of the land from Naomi. Also requires that you marry Ruth, the Moabite woman. Boaz says, the Moabite woman, Boaz says, and I quote, that that way she can have children who will carry on her husband's name and keep the land in her family. Ruth chapter 4, verse 5. And guess what? This became the deal breaker. In the end, Boaz gets the land, Ruth, the mother in law, and in time this leads to the couple having a son, like I said, at the very beginning, Obed, who becomes the father of Jesse, the grandfather to David. David is argumentably the greatest king in 1,000 years. One last thing to mention in the story of Ruth, she will become one of the selected 5 women who show up in published in the published family tree of Jesus. How amazing is that? It's absolutely amazing. One of 5 women actually mentioned in the family tree of Jesus. Now, real quick, why was this story written? The Book of Ruth is one of the books that were written by an unnamed writer on a leather scroll. Theologists and Bible experts love to guess. Let's give a few popular theories. One, David is the surprising climax of the story and the reason it was written. The Book of Ruth is a great slice of history from the family of Israel's greatest king. It's a captivating story that wonderfully illustrates the value and reward of loyalty. Three, it is a counterpoint to what some Jews consider outdated and callous teachings that spanned many centuries and was championed by a priest named Ezra. After Jews returned home from exile in what is now Iraq, then Babylon, Ezra ordered all Jewish men to divorce their non-Jewish wives. Why? The holy race had become polluted by their mixed marriages. Ezra 9, verse 2. But Ruth's story shows that Israel's greatest dynasty of uh, kings came from mixed marriages. That is the end of today's sermon and the end of the book of Ruth. Let me close this out with today's sermon. Prayer. Let's bow our heads. Lord, I ask that you watch over us, protect us over the next following week. I ask that you help us in many ways that we may need it. We thank you for the blessings that you bestowed over us last week. We ask you to guide us through whatever may come this following week. We thank you for trials and tribulations as well as any blessings that may come. In the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost. Amen. I thank you folks for joining me. I hope you have a wonderful week. I'll see you next week.